You know the stereotype, right? The brilliant but kind of socially awkward genius tortured by their own brain. But is there actually any truth to this idea that being gifted means you're paying some kind of psychological price? Today, we're going to unpack that complicated link between a high IQ and the pressure to be perfect. So, is the tortured genius a total myth, or is there some real fire behind all that smoke? Let's find out. Just for a second, what's the very first image that pops into your head? Is it some kid prodigy who just aces every single test? A brilliant scientist with, crazy hair scribbling on a chalkboard? Or maybe it's someone who really struggles to fit in. That picture you just made in your head, that's exactly what we're going to dive into. This idea actually has a name. It's called the disharmony hypothesis. It's that classic mad genius trope. The one that suggests if you have this extraordinary intellect, it's got to be balanced out by some social or emotional problems. It's a really compelling story, but is there any real data to back it up? Okay, so to start, a recent study from just 2024 suggests we might be getting this all wrong because we're lumping different kinds of high intelligence into one big bucket. These researchers argue that there are actually two totally distinct tiers of giftedness. Now, to really get their argument, we need a super quick, painless stats refresher on something called standard deviation, or SD. On a standard IQ test, the average score is 100. One standard deviation is a 15-point jump, so 2 standard deviations, or 2 SD, gets you to an IQ around 130. 3 standard deviations, 3 SD, is a much rarer score around 145. So, here's the crucial point of their study. They're saying these two groups are fundamentally different. The 2SD gifted group, the ones around that 130 IQ mark, they're described as having this intense but kind of narrow focus, sometimes rigid behaviors, and what the researchers call a potential cognitive imbalance. But on the flip side, the 3SD profoundly gifted group seems to have more big picture thinking, more creativity, and better emotional adaptability. And this is where they connect the dots. The paper says, straight up, that this cognitive imbalance they see in that 2SD group contributes to something they call maladaptive perfectionism. That's the unhealthy, anxiety-fueled kind. So, according to this study, the stereotype is true, but maybe only for a very specific slice of the gifted population. Okay, so that seems like a pretty neat explanation, right? It fits the narrative. But when we zoom out and look at all the other research out there, the picture, well, it gets a whole lot more complicated. Is it really that simple? So, to really challenge that idea, we first need to get something straight. Perfectionism isn't just one thing. Not at all. Researchers have found it actually has two very, very different faces. Okay, so on one hand, you've got the bad stuff, maladaptive perfectionism, which you can think of as perfectionistic concerns. This is all the worrying about mistakes, constantly doubting yourself, feeling crushed by pressure from other people. It's totally linked to anxiety and burnout. But then, on the other hand, you have the good kind, adaptive perfectionism, or perfectionistic strivings. This is that healthy drive, setting high standards for yourself, working hard, and actually believing you can meet your goals. This one's linked to achievement and, being happy with your life. Okay, so now that we know there are two very different kinds of perfectionism, let's look at a huge meta-analysis from 2020. This is a study that pulled together the data from a bunch of different studies to get a much bigger, much more reliable answer to our question. And when I say huge, I really mean it. This research wasn't just one small group. It combined the results from 10 different studies, covering a grand total of over 4,000 students, both gifted and non-gifted. That size gives us a really, really powerful look at what's actually going on. Now, get this. When the researchers looked for that unhealthy, maladaptive perfectionism, the bad kind, they found nothing. No significant difference at all. Gifted students as a whole group do not show higher levels of that anxiety-driven perfectionism than anyone else. The bars are basically the same. But, and this is a big but, look what happens when we switch over to the healthy, adaptive kind of perfectionism. This is where the story completely flips. Gifted students scored significantly higher on perfectionistic strivings. They have that drive, that desire to set high standards, but it doesn't come with all the baggage of anxiety and fear of failure. So the takeaway from this massive analysis is pretty direct. That myth of the tortured, unhealthy, perfectionist genius, the data just doesn't support it. If anything, being gifted is linked to the positive, achievement-focused side of perfectionism. So what do we do with this?
We have one study pointing to a link with bad perfectionism in a really specific IQ range, and then this huge analysis that says there's no link there at all. How in the world do we put these pieces together?
Well, the answer, as it so often is in the details. It all comes down to definitions. Look at how the two sources define gifted. The first paper uses a super strict IQ cutoff of 130, but the big meta-analysis, it included studies that defined giftedness much more broadly, like being in the top 10% of your class or being in a special program. These are just not the same groups of people.
And that's the whole ballgame. The answer to our big question isn't a simple yes or no. The link between giftedness and perfectionism is all about the nuance. It depends entirely on how narrowly we're defining gifted and whether we're talking about that healthy drive to succeed or that unhealthy fear of failure. The details literally change everything.
And that leaves us with a much bigger thought. The gifted label is obviously a powerful one, but as we've just seen, it can hide so much complexity and maybe even get things wrong. So it kind of forces us to ask, what other labels do we use every single day for ourselves and for other people that might be stopping us from seeing the full, messy, nuanced picture? Maybe the real gift is learning how to look past the labels and see the complex reality underneath.